I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who'd fall in love over horror movies, but here we are. My name's Marcus, and I've been seeing this guy Calloway for about 3 months now. Cal. That's what everyone calls him, though I like saying his full name sometimes just to watch him roll his eyes at me. We met at a coffee shop downtown, the kind with exposed brick and overpriced lattes that taste like someone whispered the word espresso near hot milk. I was reading, he was sketching, and when I got up to leave, I accidentally knocked his entire iced coffee into his lap. I've never apologized so profusely in my life. He just laughed, said it was karma for ordering something called a vanilla cloud macchiato, and asked if I wanted to buy him a replacement to make up for it. That was June. This is September now, and we've fallen into this pattern, this routine that feels both comfortable and electric at the same time. Every Friday night, without fail, Cal comes over to my apartment. He brings takeout, usually Thai or Indian, something with enough spice to make my eyes water. And then he picks the movie. Here's the thing, Cal always, and I mean always, picks a horror movie. Now, I should tell you something about myself. I hate horror movies, not in the fun way where people say they hate them, but secretly love the thrill. I genuinely cannot stand them. The jump scares make my heart race in a way that feels more like a medical emergency than entertainment. The creeping dread, the ominous music, the shadows that move just slightly wrong. All of it makes me want to crawl out of my skin. Cal knows this. He knows this because I told him on our second date, when he suggested we go see some new supernatural thriller, and I had to gently redirect us toward a rom-com instead. He knows this because I've mentioned it approximately 15 times since then. He knows this because last month I made him turn off a horror movie trailer that auto-played on Netflix because even that 30-second preview had me tense. And yet, every single Friday, he queues up something terrifying. The first time it happened, I thought maybe he'd forgotten. We were 2 weeks into dating, and everything still had that shiny new relationship energy where you're trying to be cool and impressive. He showed up with pad thai and a grin, settled onto my couch, and pulled up something called The Wailing. I didn't want to seem difficult, so I just nodded along. 15 minutes in, there was a scene in the woods at night, and I jumped so hard I nearly knocked over my water glass. Cal's hand appeared on my knee, steadying both me and the glass. "You okay?" he asked, and there was something in his voice, something soft and knowing. "Fine," I said, even though my pulse was hammering. "Totally fine." Another 20 minutes passed. The movie got darker, more intense. I found myself leaning closer to Cal without really meaning to, like he was a magnet and I was helpless to resist. When the next jump scare hit, I grabbed his arm without thinking, my fingers digging into his forearm hard enough that I probably left marks. He didn't pull away. He actually shifted closer, letting me press against his side. His free hand came up to rest over mine, his thumb tracing small circles on my knuckles. We stayed like that for the rest of the movie. Me half watching through my fingers, him completely absorbed in the screen, but somehow also completely attuned to every flinch and gasp I made. When the credits rolled, I was embarrassed. Here I was, a 28-year-old man, clinging to someone I'd just started dating like a scared kid. But Cal just smiled at me, this gentle, almost tender expression, and said, "Same time next week?" That was the pattern. Every Friday, a new horror movie. Every Friday, I'd try to be braver, to make it further without reaching for him. And every Friday, I'd end up pressed against his side, my hand wrapped around his arm, his steady presence the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. The thing is, I started to notice things, little details that didn't quite add up, like how Cal would always suggest we sit close together before the movie even started. "Couch is more comfortable than it looks, but you gotta find the right spot," he'd say, settling in right next to me, our thighs touching. Or how he'd position himself strategically, his arm always within easy reach, resting on the back of the couch or on the armrest closest to me. Or how he'd glance at me during the quiet parts of the movie, these quick little looks like he was checking on me, making sure I was okay. Not in an annoying, overbearing way, more like he was simply aware of me, attuned to my breathing, my body language, the tiny ways I'd tense up before something scary happened. And then there were the movies themselves. At first, I thought he was just picking randomly, whatever looked interesting or had good reviews. But after a few weeks, I started to recognize a pattern. They weren't the goriest films or the ones with the most extreme violence. They were atmospheric, psychological, the kind of horror that builds slowly, that relies on tension and dread rather than shock value, the kind of horror that makes you want to hide against someone's shoulder. I didn't say anything, though, because here's the other thing I'd started to notice. I was looking forward to Fridays, not despite the horror movies, but maybe, in some weird way, because of them. Because they gave me an excuse to be close to Cal in a way that felt natural, unforced. Because in those moments when I'd grab his arm or press my face against his shoulder, I could feel how solid he was, how steady, how safe. We hadn't really talked about what we were doing, Cal and I. We'd been on dates, sure. We texted every day, sent each other stupid memes and random observations. But we hadn't had the big conversation, the one about feelings and labels and what this thing between us actually meant. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But every time I tried to bring it up, the words would stick in my throat, and I'd chicken out. It was easier to just exist in the moment, to let Friday nights be this contained space where we could be close without having to define it. But then came last Friday, week 12 of our horror movie marathon. Cal showed up with Indian food, and this particular gleam in his eye that I'd learned meant he'd found something he was especially excited about. "Got a good one tonight," he said, setting the bags down on my kitchen counter. "Classic Japanese horror, atmospheric as hell." I groaned, but I was smiling. "You're going to give me a heart condition, you know that?" "Nah," he said easily, unpacking containers of curry and naan. "Your heart's stronger than you think." We ate dinner like we always did, sitting at my small kitchen table, our knees bumping underneath. Cal told me about his week, about the freelance design project that was driving him crazy, about his sister's upcoming wedding that he was somehow both excited for and dreading. I told him about work, about my boss who couldn't decide what he wanted, about the book I was reading that was supposed to be literary fiction, but was actually just depressing. Normal conversation, easy, comfortable. But there was something else there, too, thrumming beneath the surface, a tension that had been building for weeks, maybe months. Every time our eyes met, every casual touch that lasted just a beat too long, every moment of comfortable silence that felt loaded with things unsaid. We settled onto the couch and Cal queued up the movie. "Fair warning," he said, "this one's got some genuine scares, but the story is incredible. It's really about grief and loss, you know? The horror is just the vehicle." "You always say that," I pointed out. "Every movie is really about something deeper. Doesn't make them less terrifying." He laughed, that low, warm sound that I'd become maybe a little bit addicted to. "True, but hey, you've got me here. I'll protect you from the scary ghosts." It was a joke, casual and light, but something in the way he said it made my chest feel tight. The movie started. True to Cal's warning, it was intense from the beginning. The atmosphere was oppressive, all shadows and strange sounds and this creeping sense that something was very, very wrong. Within 10 minutes, I was tense. Within 20, I'd shifted closer to Cal, our sides pressed together, and then came a scene that got me. A figure in the darkness, moving wrong, its presence more felt than seen. I actually yelped, embarrassing as that is to admit, and my hand shot out, grabbing Cal's arm in a death grip. But this time, something was different. Instead of just letting me hold on, Cal turned toward me slightly. His hand came up to cover mine, warm and solid, and he leaned in close. "Hey," he said softly, his voice cutting through the ominous soundtrack. "You want me to turn it off?" I should have said yes. The movie was genuinely freaking me out, but I found myself shaking my head. "No, it's okay. I'm okay." "Marcus." The way he said my name, so gentle, so full of something I couldn't quite name. "You're shaking." "I know," I admitted, "but I don't want you to turn it off." "Why not?" It was a simple question, but it felt enormous. Why not? Why was I subjecting myself to something I hated, week after week? Why was I here, pressed against this man, my heart racing from both fear and something else entirely? The movie kept playing, forgotten. We were looking at each other now, really looking, and I could see my own uncertainty reflected in Cal's eyes, but there was something else there too. Hope, maybe, anticipation. "Because," I started, then stopped. Tried again. "Because I like this, being close to you. And I'm an idiot who apparently needs horror movies as an excuse to hold your hand." Cal's expression shifted, softened. "Marcus," he said again, and this time there was something almost like wonder in his voice. "You know you don't need an excuse, right?" "I don't?" "God, no." He laughed, but it sounded a little breathless. "Why do you think I keep picking horror movies?" The world tilted slightly. "What?" "I know you hate them," Cal said, and now he was the one who looked uncertain, vulnerable. "I've known from the start, but you told me that second date, remember? You said you hate horror movies because they make you want to hide, and you never have anyone to hide against. And I wanted to be that person for you. I wanted to give you a reason to get close to me, because I was too chicken to just ask you outright." I stared at him. "You've been deliberately picking movies you know will scare me, so I'll grab onto you?" "When you say it like that, it sounds manipulative." He had the grace to look sheepish. "I prefer to think of it as creating optimal conditions for physical proximity." "Cal, I know, it's ridiculous, but you're always so self-contained, you know, so careful about boundaries and personal space, and I wanted to be close to you. I wanted you to feel safe enough to let me in. And if horror movies were the way to do that, then..." He trailed off, shrugging. Something warm and bright was blooming in my chest, spreading through my whole body. "You're telling me this whole time you've been using scary movies as an elaborate scheme to get me to cuddle with you?" "Pretty much, yeah." He met my eyes, his own reflecting the flickering light from the forgotten movie. "Is that okay? Because if it's not, if I crossed a line, I'm so..." I kissed him, just leaned in and pressed my lips to his, cutting off his apology. It wasn't our first kiss, not by a long shot, but it felt different, more intentional, more real. When I pulled back, Cal was staring at me with wide eyes. "So," he said slowly, "I'm guessing that's okay." "You're an idiot," I told him, but I was smiling so wide my face hurt. "You could have just asked me to sit close to you. You didn't need to traumatize me with Japanese horror films." "I know," he admitted. "But would you have, if I'd just asked?" I thought about it, about how careful I'd been in the beginning, how scared I was of coming on too strong, of wanting too much, too fast, about how many times I'd held myself back, kept myself in check, afraid of scaring him off. "Probably not," I admitted, "not at first." "Exactly." Cal's hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing just under my eye. "I wanted to give you permission to want this, to want me, even if you couldn't say it yet." "I want this," I said, and the words felt like relief, like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. "I want you. I have for weeks, maybe from the start." "Yeah?" His voice was soft, hopeful. "Yeah." I leaned my forehead against his. But Cal, no more horror movies, or at least not every week. My heart genuinely cannot take it. He laughed, the sound vibrating through both of us. Deal. But you know what this means, right? You're going to have to find other excuses to grab my arm now. I think I can manage that, I said, and kissed him again. The movie played on, forgotten. At some point, Cal reached over and turned it off, and we just sat there on my couch, holding each other in the quiet of my apartment. His arms around me, my head on his shoulder, both of us finally exactly where we wanted to be. For the record, I said eventually, if you'd just asked me on that first Friday if you could hold me during the movie, I would have said yes. Really? Really? I was already gone on you by then. Cal pulled back to look at me, his expression somewhere between delighted and exasperated. So I put us both through 12 weeks of psychological horror for nothing? Not for nothing, I corrected. We got here, didn't we? And besides, now we have this story. How we fell in love over horror movies I hated, and you used as an elaborate excuse to hold my hand. Fell in love? Cal repeated, and there was something careful in his voice, like he was afraid to hope too much. I met his eyes. Yeah, I said simply. Fell in love. His smile was radiant, transforming his whole face. Good, he said. Because same. So much same. We stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, letting the weight and reality of what we'd said settle around us. It felt right. It felt like coming home. So, Cal said eventually, if we're not doing horror movies next Friday, what are we doing? I don't know, I admitted. What do you actually like to watch? I just realized I have no idea. Honestly, rom-coms. I'm a sucker for a good romantic comedy. I pulled back to stare at him. You're telling me you like rom-coms? This whole time you've been making us watch horror movies you don't even prefer? I mean, I don't mind horror, he said defensively. But yeah, give me a good Nora Ephron film any day. Calloway, I said, using his full name, watching him try not to smile. You're absolutely ridiculous. But you love me anyway. Yeah, I said, and it was the easiest truth I'd ever spoken. I really do. Next Friday we watched When Harry Met Sally curled up together on my couch. No jump scares, no creeping dread, no ominous music. Just two people falling in love on screen while two people who'd already fallen in love watched from my couch. Cal's arm around my shoulders, my hand resting on his knee. And you know what? I didn't miss the horror movies at all. Turns out I didn't need fear as an excuse to hold on to him. I just needed the courage to admit I wanted to. And Cal, beautiful, ridiculous Cal, had given me that. In his own weird, roundabout way, he'd shown me it was safe to want him, safe to reach for him, safe to let myself fall. We still watch a horror movie occasionally, usually around Halloween or when one gets particularly good reviews. And yeah, I still grab his arm during the scary parts. But now it's different. Now it's a choice I'm making, not a reflex I'm embarrassed about. Now when I reach for him, he's already reaching back, and we both know exactly what we're doing. We're choosing each other, again and again, in big ways and small ones. In horror movies and rom-coms and quiet Friday nights when we don't watch anything at all. Just talk and laugh and exist together in the space we've built. He always picked the horror movie knowing I'd grab his arm. And I always grabbed his arm, hoping he'd let me hold on. Turns out we were both hoping for the same thing all along. We just needed 12 weeks of scary movies to finally say it out loud. Total_char_count 16,847.